I have the proof. I'm missing parts of my body, but some people will still call me crazy and think I'm lying. It all began in 1988, and I had just graduated college with a degree in structural engineering. I landed a new job working for a large company that built underground structures, everything from storage bunkers to underground systems that could accept large freight trucks that would drop off cargo, and even underground tunnels that would extend for miles. Most of the work we did was for large retail companies that would store their cold goods underground, along with government contracts to create underground military bunkers. I'm still new at the company, so they partnered me with a senior engineer who I would spend the majority of my day overlooking the blueprints while on site and basically seeing how they run the entire company. He will be giving me all the basic training for the next 4 months while we finish a project they started last week. They are building a large underground storage basin that will be used to store oil reserves for the US government. The entire basin is as large as a lake, and we have a team of 30 excavators currently moving all the dirt in order to create the large underground storage containers. These containers will be cased with millions of pounds of steel to ensure they are fully protected and won't break open in the surrounding dirt. It's rather exciting for an engineer like myself, watching the entire project slowly come together. After a few weeks on the job, I had noticed the senior engineer wasn't too polite. He would often yell at the construction workers and talk down to them for work that could be easily explained in a simple matter. He wasn't really training me anymore, as he would get rather angry with me, saying I was all up in his personal space and he can't focus on the job. I'm not sure if he's having family trouble at home that causes him to be quite angry, but I figured I would give him space and focus on learning the ropes of the new company. I already know how to engineer large facilities, so I don't really need much training and just focusing more on the systems put in place to operate the business. One morning, the senior engineer came in happy. He even brought me a coffee from Starbucks. He seemed rather happy, as I hadn't seen him like this since the first day I met him. I came to realize he can be a good person deep down, but you must keep your distance and be wary before you piss him off. His cousin's dad is the owner of the entire company, so he's connected to the family business and not sure you want to risk this high-paying job over a work dispute. The company pays extremely well. I was surprised when they offered me such a large salary and instantly took the job. It was 3 times the amount the last job I applied for had offered me for the same amount of work. We then had to sign a silence waiver that we would not talk about the company to anybody or any of the work we do. This waiver only had legal standing for up to 10 years after you left the company, which is where I'm at now that I've decided to tell my story. Back to the early days before I get distracted. It had been around 2 years that I was working at the same engineering company. I had grown my position and was now a project manager. Steve, who was the angry senior engineer, is still a step above me, and he oversees the entire project without having to be on site the entire day. He seemed a lot happier by then, since the job had become a lot less stressful, since I was on the site engineering while he sat in the office the majority of the day, overlooking the blueprints on the computer. Steve had told me a week prior that I would be assigned my first project, that he would have further details for me next week when we finalized the deal. We had been contracted to build a large underground tunnel system in the desert of Nevada that would connect to the inner city. The tunnel system was going to be over 60 miles long, buried over 300 feet below the desert floor. This was one of the largest projects our company had signed since it had began and would take us over 3 years to complete. The amount paid was in the billions, so I instantly knew this was a government contract, since only the government could afford to pay such large amounts for something like an underground tunnel. Not only that, the entire tunnel property went below the homes of the citizens without them knowing, so I knew this was for the military, as they are the only ones in the country with such power to build a 60-mile tunnel. I was excited. I overlooked the blueprints and realized this might be one of the largest projects anybody has taken on in America. We had signed a waiver, which kept me silent, so I couldn't even tell my own friends what we were working on. As an engineer, you might know how frustrating that may be, since we always want to speak about the projects we're creating. The construction was about to commence. We have a company meeting and gathered over a dozen engineers to overlook the job. Our boss explained we would be working with a group of military construction workers deep in the desert of Nevada. We would not be able to leave the construction site on the weekdays and will sleep in the temporary housing Monday through Friday. Saturday morning, we would be airlifted outside of the job site back into the local airport, which we would have to be back at the airport early Monday morning to be airlifted back into the job site. I wondered why so much secrecy, but didn't dare ask questions. The CEO who was explaining the projects to us is a rather intimidating man. I've never had a personal conversation with him in my life, and have only seen him a handful of times since I had been working at this company. To be honest, I'm pretty sure he was part of the mafia. His entire look was like all the mafia boss movies I've seen in my life, always carrying a cigar, even if it wasn't lit. We were all getting ready to be airlifted into the job site for our first day of work. We had been told we only need to bring our personal clothes, that all housing and food will be provided inside the base. We were flying in a black helicopter. It didn't have any company logos or government emblems and looked quite stealth, as I felt a sense of importance as the dozen engineers got on board. After a short 35-minute flight, we arrived at the gates of what looked like a fully guarded military base. The helicopter had to land in front of the gate and request for entrance. The military guards came to the helicopter and inspected everything. And when I say everything, I mean even our clothes, our shoes. We had to almost strip down naked and were left in our trousers. Once the search was completed, that took about 30 minutes, the pilot was given access to enter the military base by air, which means we had to go back up and fly into base and land at the helicopter pad that was located next to what looked like our temporary housing. It was a row of insulated military tents. There were basic accommodations inside, such as a bed, toilet, and shower, and even air conditioning. It was similar to living in a small RV, I would suppose. I figured it wasn't too bad, and for the amount of money I would make working this job, I could retire by the time the project is completed in about 3 years. I could already picture my future. I was going to travel to all the tropical destinations I could find on a map and enjoy the rest of my life sipping margaritas on the beach. But nothing went the way I expected, and I almost lost my life just 1 month into the job. I had encountered one of the most scariest moments of my life, which left me in a military hospital for 3 weeks while I recovered. It was another day on the job site. We were using heavy machines to drill directly into the ground of the Nevada desert. We had to get down to 300 feet, where we would then begin framing a large metal structure to withstand a tunnel below. The dirt above the tunnel weighs millions of pounds, and we couldn't risk the tunnel collapsing, so we had a team of military construction welders on site to begin welding the structure underground. We had dug a round hole that measured 3 feet wide and could fit a small cage with an engineer inside the cage, and had to be propelled down the hole until reaching the work site 300 feet below. One person at a time, we would be sent down the cage elevator, being held by a strong wire above. Sometimes the cage would get stuck on the side of the walls, and we would have to wiggle around inside the cage until it would become unstuck and continue going down. We were given a radio to signal the operator above if we were stuck or needed help. I never knew I had claustrophobia until I had to be holstered into a tiny round 3-foot cage every day to begin working. Since I was project manager, I always had to be the first one down to the job site and was also the last one to leave the job site as well. We had to bring our own food down with us, unless you wanted to go up the 300-foot cage elevator, which I preferred not to. It was another early morning, and my alarm sounded around 4:45 a.m. as I began preparing for another long day of work in the tunnel system below. I was already dreading the cage elevator ride, as for some reason that was the first thing on my mind this morning. I took a quick shower to wake myself up and prepared my food for the rest of the day. I arrive at the job site 30 minutes before the workers. I inspect everything and make sure it's all good to continue another day of work. I had arrived to the cage elevator and we didn't have the operator on site, so I grabbed the self-propelling remote as I began to descend the large 300-foot hole. I got stuck halfway through, around 120 feet below the surface. I had to wiggle the cage around a bit until I could feel it free itself from the dirt wall next to me. As I arrived at the bottom, I opened the cage door, and to my surprise, there was a strange creature standing right in front of me in the tunnel 300 feet below the surface. I had no idea what I was staring at. I had never seen something like this before and stood there in shock, wondering what to do. The creature stood around 4 feet tall and what most people call a cyclops. It had only one large eye in the middle of its head and seemed like the most inbred creature I had ever seen in my life. I had no idea what this was, as there was no access to the tunnel and we were 300 feet below the surface. At that moment, the creature began making a circling motion over his stomach area, and a bright green light zipped out of its stomach, hitting me so hard in the chest I fell backwards, landing in the elevator cage on my butt. I felt a large stinging sensation in my hand as I had attempted to block the light from the underground being. It had burnt right through my palm, taking off half my fingers on my right arm. The creature stood there staring at me as I felt I was going to die. I screamed at the creature in pain and began shouting to get back, as I could see him rubbing his chest area again with another sharp light zipping at my body, hitting my leg. It had burnt a large piece into my left leg, and I figured I was about to be killed. At that moment, I dragged myself up the side of the cage and shut the door in front of me. The creature once again shot another bright light out of its chest, hitting the side of the cage as it burnt right through the cage, leaving a large hole in the metal. It began to hit the self-propel button as I could hear the cage lifting off the floor. I made it up into the beginning of the 300-foot tunnel and never felt so happy to be going up this cage in my life. I could see my arm bleeding, and my foot was burning so bad I knew I had little time to make it back before I passed out. I was going to die in this cage, hundreds of feet below the desert surface. I began to slowly see light above as I got closer and closer to the top. I could hear people talking above as the engineers slowly began arriving to the top of the job site to be propelled down to work. As I made it to the top, my coworker saw me in dire pain and began to panic, asking me what happened. I couldn't explain to them what I had just encountered and asked them to get help, to find a medic. What felt like forever, I could see the engineers running back with a man in a military uniform wearing a white gown. I knew they had found the doctor as he began tending to my wounds. He gave me a green whistle to blow in and blow out, as it began to numb my entire body and I could no longer feel the pain from the wounds. I spent the next several weeks in a military hospital recovering from the wounds the strange creature 300 feet below the surface did to me. Whatever that creature was, it wanted me dead and had some sort of natural attack weapon that shot laser beams or whatever it was from its chest. The entire crew of engineers were all taken off the job site and were replaced with a new set of engineers. They said it was part of the military secrecy program that none of them were eligible to work on the site any longer. I think the military knows what is down there, but they can't speak about it. I was given a retirement plan by my company and was signed to stay quiet by the contract I signed when I started for 10 years. This all happened back in 2001, and it's now 2012 as I release this information to the public. I hope they don't come after me and end up disappearing me, but I had to get this off my conscience as this keeps me up every night for the past 10 years of my life.